Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
Hello. On today's episode, we have therapist Mei join us for a conversation all about existential philosophy and finding authenticity. Together, we talk about shifting between our rational mind and body wisdom, recognizing the scale of the universe, and the praxis between philosophy and psychology. Y'all, you have heard me talk about existentialism a multitude of times on this podcast, and if you're ever curious what that actually really means, Mei and I get into a great conversation about finding authenticity in the multiple choices that we have available to us in this large and vast universe. So if you want to explore your existential dread and what it means to be in relationship with other people, then this is the episode for you. Tune in. So your academic side, could you tell me more about where that was coming from? And what are the caveats? I'm just kind of curious for you.
Yeah, sure. So it probably makes more sense if I try to give a big picture narrative.
Sure, I love that. Yep.
I grew up more or less wanting to be a professor.
Mm-hmm.
And I did go to a PhD program in philosophy right after undergrad. And I started out wanting to do history of analytic philosophy. So specifically like Wittgenstein and foundations of logic stuff. And gradually shifted over the years and ended up starting a dissertation in aesthetics. It was addressing the big question of aesthetics, like, is there such a thing as an intersubjectively valid aesthetic judgment? And I was trying to answer the question from a roughly Humean point of view, but also built in was a sort of feminist and, race conscious critique of Hume's actual answer.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the project.
Yeah.
And I ended up leaving ABD. So I had written and had approved like about 30% of my dissertation. And I walked away from the project, which was actually a pretty traumatic experience. It literally had a dream last night that was related to it. And it has been many years.
If you're willing to share, I'd love to hear. Wow.
What the dream?
I mean, both. I mean, whatever you're willing to share about this experience, it sounds like it was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, I suspect you know this already, but there's a lot of people, I think, who go into PhD programs in the humanities often tend to have their identity really wrapped up in that. And that was me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much a way of life. A less gentle way to say it is that, grad school is kind of a cult, and you can mean that lovingly or you can mean that very critically. And I probably mean it both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the walking away from it was never, I hate this work and I don't want to do it, which made it a little more troubled, I think, of a decision than it would have been had it been differently. It was just like a confluence of things, feeling sort of wildly unsupported as a person in that environment, and having an advisor who she disappeared and sort of not only didn't give me comments, but also I couldn't get her to respond to an email saying when she might be able to give comments for months and months and months. And it's also quite depressed. And, there were personal things that were hard. And it was just at the time kind of there are no jobs and I don't know how to make progress because I need this person's response before I can know where to go from here. And, the department was not very helpful when I went in for this, to sort of say, well, I can't get in touch with her and she's not giving me comments. What do I do? And I had been through, this was I was at UIC and I had arrived the year after we got our first union contract, and I'd been super active in the union. And had been kind of I think gradually coming to understand to understand systems of oppression, including class-based oppression, and including the idea that what I was doing was actually work and the people I was working for did not see it this way, but was also like getting, as part of doing my dissertation research, I was gaining the vocabulary and the concepts to describe the aspects of my own experience of like racism and sexism within the academy that were, it was quite punishing in many ways, and coming to consciousness about it and having it be so raw and sort of like getting the language to talk about it from the discipline I was working in, which was also very punishing to me, was somehow, it was too much emotionally.
Wow.
Yeah. Were I to be in the situation with the dissertation now, I think it would be very different because I've had so much more time to sort of integrate everything that I learned and become accustomed to seeing what's happening more clearly.
Yeah.
But at the time it was much too raw. And so I was just sort of like, nope.
Yeah.
Enough of this.
Right. Which makes sense for safety sense at that point. Like it didn't make sense to continue in an environment that you weren't being supported and had all these other layers of like oppression going on at that time.
Yes, I think it makes sense for what it was at the time. And yet I wish that, you know, I wish things had been different so I'd been able to finish the project, because I still find the question quite interesting, and I still quite like reading philosophy and yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting question. How, like, did you get, I mean, I know it's probably not the right question, like, what's the answer? You know what I mean? I think in philosophy, that's a big question. What's the answer, right? But did you get any sort of like answer to that question?
I mean, ish.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious what you found from your research, and like even now looking back on it, kind of what your perspective is on that question.
I mean, I thought then, and I still think now, that there is a right answer indexed to a certain community of appreciation that one has to be kind of like inculcated into, or, you know, sort of fluent in the language of.
Yes.
And then, yes, in this context, there is a right answer, but it's not the right answer for everybody for all time.
Right.
And there can be other right answers too. And when it comes to adjudicating between right answers, I don't actually tend to think that one is righter than the other.
Right.
Yeah. It's just
exactly
two different cultures that you're looking at. In a sense.
Exactly. And yeah, a lot of my work is with relationships, and I think the same thing applies, where it's like, what's the right way to be in a relationship? But it's always impossible to have that question pulled out of the cultural context that you're in, right? Like it's just impossible to pull those factors away. And so within that, it's always going to depend on whatever culture and other, you know, values are in that society to answer that question. So there is no right or wrong, you know what I mean? Just different answers.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. That makes a lot of sense.
So then you stopped the program. Where did you go after that? What do you decide to do after getting 30% of your dissertation done?
So I hung around for a little bit, doing something else. I actually migrated to the Germanic Studies department, where spent a semester teaching German, seeing if I liked it.
Totally different. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Writing about German literature.
Sure.
And then I moved to Berlin, ran away to Berlin, as one does. And then sort of like there was a period of me just figuring out what can I do with the skills and interests that I have.
Yeah.
So let's see. I taught English as a foreign language, and I taught philosophy and literature and cinema studies and foreign languages to high school students at a school for gifted kids.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and I worked in study abroad in Russia. And then I sort of, you know, through various experiences that I had through all of that and in my own personal life, gradually came to realize that what I actually wanted to do was be a therapist. And so I came back to Chicago to retrain to do that.
Yeah.
So here I am.
Yeah. If you're willing to share, like, what sort of personal experiences do you feel like led you to that path? Because I feel like every therapist, anyone in the helping profession, really has like a personal story to like what it was that kind of propelled them to leap into this field.
Yeah, there's always something, isn't there?
Yes. That's what I like to pull out. I'm like, what's the something?
Yeah. I mean, it was a lot of somethings.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I mean, part of it was the career change itself, right?
Yeah.
Which was quite emotionally complex for me. Some of it was going through relationship stuff, and sort of like, I don't know, doing a lot of more introspection and a lot more thinking about that relationship and how it worked or didn't work at the time. A very big part of it was losing my sister.
Wow.
Yeah, during this period, she was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, and I was one of the people who took care of her through her brief and harrowing illness. And during that experience, I specifically discovered that there weren't a lot of resources available, especially in the community where she lived, for people who were not religious. And it really felt like, there needed to be something. We needed something that was that. And I realized, therapy is what that would have been. After a visit from a very nice social worker who was sort of the most helpful person that we encountered.
Yeah, so you were able to see that person come in that role and feel that meaning and the importance of that sort of work in a very personal way.
Yeah, for sure. She was very grounding for us, the family members, as well as to my sister herself. And I could sort of see how what we got from speaking with her then reverberated through, the family system, and, was beneficial to all of us, I think.
Yeah. I love that word, reverberated, like through your community and your family. I think that's a beautiful way to talk about what the gift is of therapy, right? And even beyond therapy, just the gift of human connection that we can give to other people by changing them and changing the energy and the perspective.
Yes, it needn't be under this aegis of, professional therapy. It can be lots of different kinds of encounters.
Exactly. That's something I'm always thinking about too, because even therapy itself is like a privileged thing that a lot of people don't have. So then how do people have that same sort of community support through other ways that aren't this like professional academic lens, right? Because that's also what we need as a human species. And so people are doing this role in different communities in different ways, not necessarily just the academic, trained professional therapist or social worker.
Oh gosh, yes. And there are contexts where, somebody who has that specific training and does it professionally is maybe not who's needed or who's wanted.
Right. Exactly. Without the right skill set to speak to certain groups of people. Yeah, definitely. So then that was you feel like the big point that kind of switched where you were like, this is what I want to do. Was this something you had thought about in the past, maybe becoming a therapist? Or was it a big shift?
I had toyed with the idea before. I think this was the thing that made the really big shift. And then there were other things that were maybe less intense after that sort of echoed it back to me. Like, yes, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. And then how long have you been doing it now?
Not so long. Let's see. This is my second year of doing it.
Still fresh.
Still very, very fresh.
Yes.
So I'm still finding my way.
Yes, completely. Aren't we all, right? What do you feel like you've gained in the last 2 years of working as a therapist? I know.
Big question.
I know.
I would say, well, one thing, right, is like when you work with clients, you have this kind of privilege of getting access to like very richly textured, very different human experitions in the world. Somebody describes to you in a very fine-grained way what their experience is. And, a huge part of your task is just to understand, or, the way that I work, a huge part of my task, maybe the major thing that I'm doing is really trying to understand what that is for them. That's kind of incredible because we don't get a lot of opportunities to go that deeply into someone else's experience. And so I guess I've learned a lot, not only about the way certain things are in the world, like what kinds of experiences do people have when they encounter the medical system, but also just sort of like the amazing individuality of the way that different people take up these things that we do all encounter in common in the world. And so I would say I have a renewed appreciation for that and for the richness and kind of unpredictability of that.
Yes. Yes, 100%. I mean, I think one of my favorite metaphors, I mean, granted, I'm still in training, right? So I actually don't have clients yet. The people on the podcast are as much as I get to drop into this world of seeing people's perspectives right now. But I like to think of it as like galaxies and other systems. We're almost like astronomers where we're peering into this world and like looking at their stars that they see. Because everyone with all of their relationships and meaning making, they all have their own little galaxies of what this life is. And right, I think a lot about the subjective truth in that we get to dive into and learn from. I think it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this that it's galaxies because it's like you've got a really nice microscope not microscope, but telescope, and you get to peer in and you get somebody to tell you what you're looking at.
Exactly.
You'd never know otherwise.
Exactly, which I think is beautiful. And I think with that lens, it can make the work very interesting to be looking at everyone has their own experience of truth in this world, right? I think this is where maybe the existentialism starts to come in. I'm curious how that relates to your work. And I guess also on the podcast, I've never had anyone define existential thought. I talk about it a lot because I'm passionate about it, but I would love to hear how that relates to your work and maybe just a general definition of existentialism if you could. Gosh. I know that's a hard, but yeah.
I'll do my best with the caveat that, people disagree about how to define things and people think very differently about, existentialism or any other school of thought and how it figures in their work. Yeah. Okay, so with that disclaimer aside, the way I think of it is that existentialism is a body of thought / maybe also a method for thinking through situations and experiences that a person encounters from the perspective of the one encountering it, and that it sort of deals with a set of questions about more or less universal human experiences like death, anxiety, freedom, and relationships with other people. So sort of like if you were to talk about human life in the most general sorts of terms from the perspective of an individual experiencing it, these might be some of the big chapter headings that you would have in that book. And this is a way of approaching them.
Yeah. I have one of the post-it notes. It's got death, existence, isolation, and meaning.
Yeah.
4. Yeah, chapter heads of human
those
experience.
Are the big chapter. Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like even more within context, I think what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, right? This is not my area of expertise. This is just my fun, things that I like to talk about. Existentialism, I feel like, is also this understanding that there is no objective truth or meaning to our existence, right? And within that, we get to choose what it is for us, not like a nihilistic, there's no point, right? Because I feel like sometimes people really get those two mixed up, the understanding of existentialism and nihilism. And so when I talk about existentialism, they're always like, that's so dark, that's so meaningless. And I'm like, you're missing the second leap from that point.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's funny that people have that reaction. It's the same reaction that like Sartre encountered, and that's why he wrote, existentialism as a humanism, essentially, one of the reasons. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It's so I think the recognition or the idea that there is no inherent predefined meaning or point to human existence does sound very jarring, upsetting, depressing, anxiety-inducing, et cetera, to people. But then, yes, the part that comes after that is that you have the freedom and also the tremendous responsibility to define what that is for yourself, which is like not an easy task, but I think, a rather wonderful task.
Exactly. Which makes sense that it's difficult, right? Like, because you have, I, I always equate it to the difference between going to Trader Joe's or a Walmart, right? You go into Trader Joe's, you got one option for spaghetti sauce, it's great. You go into Walmart, you got a whole wall, we get this analysis paralysis when you have so many options. And yeah, when there's no objective meaning, you come up to this big unknown void of what am I going to do with my life? Knowing I could do anything.
Absolutely anything. Oh, it's terrifying. And personally, I prefer to shop at Trader Joe's because there's only one option. Which
exactly.
Maybe says something about that experience.
Yeah, analysis paralysis. It's scary, right? It's like, and I think that's why we're like, sometimes the language used to describe these things is that, yeah, we're forced to make that choice. That is our like suffering, right? Is that we have to decide what we're going to do with this opportunity, being it so big and expansive.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the fact that you only get one life and it only lasts so long and you could literally do, maybe not any of the things, but an awful lot of the things are available to any individual at a particular time. Yes, it's a kind of, it's an irrevocable choice that you make at each moment, not in the sense that you can't go back and do something different, or you can't change your plan, or you can't realize that, the meaning of your life or the purpose of your life is something slightly different than what you thought, or radically different than you thought. But at each moment you are making a choice to do something and, be something, and you won't get that moment back. And so in a small way, we're constantly encountering the horizons of our life or our limitations.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, fluidity, we can decide what meaning is and all these sorts of things throughout our life. But exactly what you said, like time is always eluding us. So there is no way to get back that time. And knowing that death is inevitable, we're constantly facing this choice of like, is this the most quote unquote authentic, decision for me? And I think that's such a difficult thing to determine. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, what authenticity is and how you find it.
Oh, gosh.
I know. I'm just giving you easy questions on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, right.
They're the good questions. As a philosophy mind, I'm sure you love them just as much as I do.
These are great, juicy questions.
Yeah.
I'll again do my best. Gosh. This is one of the curses of reading philosophy. Like, when you ask me what is authenticity, I immediately start thinking about how difficult it's been for others to define that. For me, though, I would say something like this. Acting authentically is acting as much as possible under the circumstances, including under the circumstance of like never having even complete self-knowledge, acting in accordance with your own values, your own beliefs, your perception of what is really like the best, rightest, and most you thing for you to do in a given situation. And I think I'm saying it with a lot of caveats around it because there are always like limitations on the things that we're able to do. And there are also like limitations around how clear we can be at any given time about what our own values and beliefs and the best, most rightest, most us thing to do even is, which is maybe where this starts to intersect with therapy. Like trauma, interferes with our ability to even be able sometimes to feel what is the best, rightest, most us thing to do.
Oh, 100%. As someone who's gone through a handful of toxic relationships, I think it's hard when what your heart says is toxicity. I want that. And it's like, how do we sit when, things like that, which maybe aren't necessarily my highest authentic, value system, conflicts with maybe what trauma and classical conditioning has taught me to like, and then trying to define like, okay, when do I trust my gut versus when do I look at this as something that's, a maladaptive choice or, something like that. And then it gets so hard to tell the difference between the two, and that, therapy gets into that.
Yes, torturedly hard when what feels like home and the waters that we should be swimming in is actually just the thing that feels familiar and it's terrible.
Yes, exactly. I'm curious because I I don't know if you're like me or you're so much up in your head here, right? A lot of thoughts, a lot of critical thinking. You like logic. I like, that's where I love to stay. And I've been trying to learn more about trusting my intuition and feelings and body-based wisdom. I'm curious how that lands for you and what you as a fellow philosopher like think about that.
I'm nodding vigorously because I can relate to that particular struggle or learning curve so much. Yes, me too.
Yeah. Because I think part of me wants to stay in the, academic realm of pure science. And then the other half of me has these repeated experiences where I feel like my body might have been telling me something that I ignored, like just, a gut feeling about someone or a situation. And I've been trying to lean more into that, but it's such also a big like unknown without, empirical evidence to kind of like guide whether I'm following me or following a trauma response or something. It's just so hard to know.
It's incredibly hard to know. Yeah. I've been on a similar kind of journey of specifically, in my case, trying to listen to my body when it's showing me that I feel anxious.
Ooh.
Because I tend to, I'm not great at listening to my gut. And my gut has led me astray many times.
Exactly. Which is why we're cautious to follow it, right?
Yeah. But like a funny experience I've had, and I recognize this is not everyone's experience of this thing, but my experience of raising a little kid has been really helpful.
How has that been? Tell me.
It's been a wild ride.
I can imagine.
Yeah. But it's, for some reason, perhaps because the person whose welfare I'm thinking about is not just mine, but also this tiny human's. Maybe because in situations where I need to listen to how I'm feeling, I'm not in the situations usually that also trigger my trauma response. So it's kind of a safer laboratory to practice or something.
Sure.
But it has been really, really useful, I think, and helpful in learning how to be in my body and in my emotions and actually listen to them, because my little kid doesn't care very much for my intellectualizing, and doesn't do much of it. Does do some of it himself, but doesn't do so much of it like I do. Yeah, and has some pretty clear body-based wisdom of his own that if I don't listen to it, right, then, things will be bad for him. But also especially because, I'm still nursing him, because our physical bodies are now so part of a single system, listening to him is also a cue to listen to me. And sometimes it's the same thing and sometimes it's different things that we need. But I'm sort of forced to attune to that all the time in a place that is, again, for me, wouldn't be for everybody, but for me, a relatively safe place to be doing that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a beautiful wisdom that kids have of that body base. This doesn't feel right for me. And I don't know when we stopped listening to that as adults, but it happened somewhere along the line, and trying to come back to that can be so hard. But I think, here you have a little galaxy in your hands, right? Where you're able to kind of peer in and see it again and now learn from someone. And I love that, reversal of the roles, right? We always think about like teacher student, these sort of power dynamics, but I think people frequently forget that it's always flipped just as much, right? Like you're learning from your child just as much as I'm sure they will and are continuing to learn from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I think I'm learning more, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it makes sense. I mean, I don't have any kids, so, don't take my word for a grain of salt, right? Or whatever. But, from what I've read and understand, a lot of it is about co-regulation, especially because children don't know how to do that yet. So one of the important things that we can do as parents or even older siblings or anybody with a younger child is be able to co-regulate with them, which means relaxing what we're feeling in our bodies so we can both relax together.
Yes, 100. That is like that is, I think, the thing that I was pointing to that you've just said in a much more articulate way. A lot of it is like, I notice that he is dysregulated.
Yep.
I look at the situation and at myself and go, huh, of course you are. And then I calm myself down in order to help him allow to calm down, because yes, he doesn't have that ability yet to do it without help. And so, things like when he's having a tantrum, he's now 2.5, me like sort of taking a deep breath and reminding myself like, yeah, this is happening because you're very distressed about something. It makes sense that you're distressed about it. You're 2.5, and something has happened that's wildly out of your control, maybe, or you're very tired, or you're hungry. Now I calm myself. I modulate my voice in order to help you calm down. And it's, there was actually an episode of the Ezra Klein show about this, where he talked about doing this. Interacting in this way with his child, but that, it had occurred to him that we don't often think about that when interacting with adults. And yet, we just as much are co-regulating beings, and we need that from other people.
100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, we have mirror neurons, right? That when we're looking at another human, we feel what they feel in our bodies, and that's a part of our human experience. And so then, the ability to co-regulate, I think, is the beauty of connection and experiences like therapy, right? Where we're able to have that container space. I don't know. I guess for me, I feel so sensitive to everybody's energy, not in some like woo-woo way, but like when someone is feeling sad or anxious, like I can feel that in my own body. So I'm curious if you feel that as a therapist and a fellow person that's on this path.
Oh gosh, yes. I do. And one of the things that's been sort of amazing actually about doing therapy is that I feel like I've become more able to tell when it's happening. Like, not just that it sort of happens and I'm, the person in front of me is suffering. And so I'm feeling also generally rather sad and suffering and taking in what they're saying and feeling, but also that I'm sort of aware of the moment in my body where I tune to their wavelength. And I've gotten better, I think, too, at parsing out what's my feeling and what's their feeling, because
tell me more. Yeah. How did you do that? Please share. That is like rich knowledge.
Oh gosh, how to articulate. And I'm also still learning this, but
it
seems like a lifelong task.
It is, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it started with the intellectual side, right? Of like, client is talking about a thing that, I have a really big emotional reaction to, and being able to track sort of which parts of my reaction are about me and something that this triggers in my own experience, right? So as an example, a client was talking about something that happened in their family of origin that they found really hurtful. And I had a similar episode in my family of origin that I also found very hurtful. And so, a big part of my task in that moment is like holding space for the client and not taking up space of my own, because that's not my space to take up. And so like afterwards in supervision and also, alone, I was sort of parsing out like, what exactly happened for them? How did they experience that? What about that was hurtful to them? Okay. And how did that connect to the many like nodes or like different parts of the rhizome that is them and the way that they are in the world and so on, their emotional galaxy. And then, and then doing that for me. And then in the next session, sort of being aware of it. And when it came up, being able to parse out more in real time, which parts of this are me taking in their thing and which parts of this are me independently feeling my thing. Because it's important to keep my responses kind of purely focused on them. But I would say through like many hours of doing that with everybody, because every client at some point brings up something that hits a personal note.
Yes.
It's possible for it to be otherwise. Sort of come to notice, to be able to tell like, oh, this body feeling that I'm having, this is me hearing what they're saying. And sort of seeing their body language. And this feels, I don't have like a horse in this race, a
Sure.
skin in
Yeah,
this
no,
game,
that's
whatever the
fair.
metaphor
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like this is just definitely I'm feeling this way because I'm taking in what they're sharing.
Exactly. Yeah,
Versus,
exactly.
you know, like versus they're saying this thing and I'm feeling myself tense up because I'm thinking about that memory where this other thing happened to me, or even what they're saying to me is
Sure.
landing as a microaggression or something, and I'm feeling really revved up about it.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So yeah, what I'm hearing is like the ability to kind of track what might be activating for you, and through a lot of time of, I mean, supervision, having other people talk about it with you, taking space to reflect and these sorts of things so that you can kind of know the difference between the feelings, which is, yeah, these are, you know, things that don't have right words yet, or we don't have as a human species to describe empathy and these sorts of things yet. But I think it's valuable to point out that you're still feeling their emotions. There's no point at which you start to block. You still feel, you know, that grief that they feel in your body, but you're able to recognize where it's coming from.
Yes, that's right. It's about figuring out the source and being a container for it as opposed to being a source of it.
Yes, I love that distinction. I think container is interesting. And in that, you're also giving so much of yourself. You know what I mean? And I think this applies, right, to even people that aren't therapists and outside of our work as therapists, just as humans that connect with other people. When someone's sharing a moment of, you know, it can be positive things like joy or really sad things, like that ability to feel that in ourselves and be in that space with them, I think is more of a universal experience that needs to be talked about.
People don't talk about that much, do they? Even though it's the foundation of relationships and, you know, is the reason or sort of the purpose or the thing that we do when we gather to celebrate something good that's happened for somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in the non-monogamy space, there's this word called compersion, which is about experiencing joy from your partner's joy. And even like things like that, like I don't think we have exactly right. And I think that could even be used in non-poly situations when you look at your friends and other people having joy, like the ability to feel those emotions with them and be in that space, I think is such a beautiful gift of relationships and healthy connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that I didn't know this word, and I love that there's a word for that. But yes, I mean, I think that makes sense to me within the context of non-monogamy, and it also makes sense in the context of something like, you know, your friend published their book that they've been working on for 10 years, and you feel the joy that they feel at having completed this thing and put it out into the world. And and it is so much of what holds us together.
But we don't have language for these things. Or think about it, you know, like I'm happy for them, I think is typically what we say, but like we don't really embody the joy of other people and with that the suffering, which I think makes sense because we can't, like, I don't know, I live my life this way, I feel like, as an emotional sponge, but like it's hard to do that. Do you know what I mean? Because then you go a lot of different directions with people. And so like, how can you still maintain your sense of self while also being an emotionally vulnerable and open person to people's fluctuations? I feel like that gets kind of difficult. I don't know, for me, I need a lot of alone time. That's how I function, is I need time to be in my own container and my own ocean and just like feel back to me. Yeah,
same. I need a lot of time to recharge. And, you know, different people are different with are comfortable with different levels of like porosity, you know, in these matters. But I think we all obviously do this to some extent. But yes, it can be very tricky depending on your temperament and what your sense of self is and how okay you are with being vulnerable in that way.
Yeah. I'm curious too, how do you feel like your therapy work has affected your relationships in general?
It definitely has.
I'm curious. I'm like, I know the answer is yes. So
yeah. I mean, I think in the beginning, it probably affected it in slightly awkward ways. Like I could no longer turn off I'm just holding space for you and not saying anything of my own right now.
Yes, that is still where I'm at. So please help.
Oh gosh. I mean, yeah, I know I've made it really awkward for friends who actually wanted me to be there as me. And I think I think my experience was mortification when I realized I had done this and that it was like not satisfying to the person on the other side. Being like, oh, that was really bad for them.
Yeah.
That's not what they wanted and they were confused. And then just kind of learning that it's okay that I take off my like therapist cardigan or whatever when I leave the office.
Accurate.
Yes, so there's a meme that I'm thinking of.
That's funny.
Yeah, like sort of convincing myself that it's okay for me to be a person, just a regular person in my off hours. And yet, I would say I'm a little more attuned to the way that I respond to people now, maybe, and a little more attuned to, again, like the ways in which what they're saying or a situation that they're in might be quite activating for me, and sort of a little more sensitive around like, and is it helpful for them to know that right now? Maybe yes, and maybe no, because the boundary is very different in a friendship.
Exactly. It is completely different, right? And the cardigan, I always say hat, but I kind of like the cardigan. I'm going to say that now. The cardigan of therapy is fundamentally different than the relationship of a friendship. There's just different space taking. I think even what you said earlier of holding that container compared to maybe playing in a container with a friend or something, it's just completely different. But I found myself as just like a budding clinician in this field to always be listening to other people and then be like, okay, well, I need to do empathetic following, listening, repeat back that I've heard them and repeat that I'm listening to them. And then I'm like so up here in my thoughts of how do I listen and be an effective, caring human that I feel like I am no longer human because now I'm like, you know what I mean? But
you're like trying so hard that you're actually undermining the thing that you meant to be doing.
Exactly. I actually talked to Dr. Woody about this. I'm like, so what do you do? Like, when does the empathetic listening and following, repeating, and like caring for someone like change, from the therapy sense to friendships? And like, when do you turn that off, or do you turn that off? Maybe we don't, like it is different, but like the energy behind listening and reflecting back empathy and unconditional positive regard, those sort of things, maybe they should be in all of our relationships. You know what I mean?
I mean, I do tend to think so. Yeah. I think of my best friendships as being having that kind of shape, and yet I'm also not afraid to, when somebody says something about a thing that's happened to them, neither am I afraid to say just, oh, that's awful. I'm really sorry, which is maybe not what I would say
in therapy.
Or to also say like, and that happened to me too, let me tell you about it.
It's different. It's a different dance of energy. But yeah, I think the skills are something that I'm so thankful to be learning, of just connecting with humans. And I think it's so fun if you're an equal soul like me to be able to bounce off the ideas of philosophy and all these things. And actually, I feel like therapy is the praxis of these ideas, right? We can get so much in our heads about like, what does this mean? What is this? But actually, what does that look like in the day-to-day lived experience of walking in the world?
Yeah. Gosh, yes. Actually, so for me anyway, this is getting toward the answer of like, how does existentialism relate to like doing therapy? Because for me, at least, I think intellectually, I think it's true that we don't have a predefined, essence as human beings, and so we don't have like a predefined meaning or purpose to our life. And sort of, how does that look? Well, to me, that's a lot of what I see people hashing out in therapy, and what I love to kind of be there to space for is like people figuring out, well, what is it? Because, no matter what it is that somebody is, coming into therapy to talk about, there are these moments where people will bring up things like, what is the meaning of their life, or their awareness that their time in this world is limited, and what are they going to do with it? Or, what is their isolation, and all of these sorts of things. And I think my ear is very attuned to that, and to maybe holding space for those points of that moment of like aporia, where the person sees that they don't have the answer and they haven't yet figured it out.
Completely. Yeah. I want to respond to that, saying that like I feel like, existentialism came out of like the modern movement, and I feel like with our current access to knowledge of the world, I feel like existentialism is going to be the big thing of future generations, just in the sense that we know so much about the world and we know so much about the scale of the universe and our slight small scale in comparison. And how can you make meaning of your existence knowing all this information that humans before really didn't know? Do you know, we've never had this amount of access to information at our fingertips to kind of like, this is like the Walmart, right, of info of the world, of everything. Now it's just, I don't know how we could ever make sense of this, where I feel like a lot of therapy work is gonna be existentialism in the future of like, yeah, what do we make meaning? How do we make meaning of this complete void? It's huge in a way that humanity has never really been able to see, I think, because of the internet and access to information.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's sort of like the idea of, people during the agrarian period living in a small place and not being maybe more than 10 miles away from home during their entire life. And now we have the awareness of like where we're situated in the universe. And yes, and also sort of, yeah, it's huge. And the smallness of our social worlds within even just like
the
Earth.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right?
Yes, and also, and this is like on a more grim and doomy note, but also climate change, right? I mean, sort of the finitude of this place that we live and this way of life that we're currently living.
Yeah.
I think it's top of mind for a lot of people, especially younger people.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. Yeah. I feel like the more I look at the grand scale of the universe and the absurdity that it is in all of its glory, the more I come back to the importance of even the small scale, right? Like the small scale for me personally of my little tiny universe, of the relationships that I know, knowing that it is so big. I come back to, okay, so the meaning is right here. It's like in the close relationships that I am building. And when it's so big, it's really just about the humans for me.
Yeah, that's kind of lovely and like very sort of paradoxical and yet makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's that William Blake thing of seeing the universe in a grain of sand or something. Like I've come to love cultivating my tiny window box garden.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And take meaning in that. We don't have to conquer the world and understand all of it to have a beautiful and significant life. We can build something right here that is meaningful to just you, just me. I think, again, that's the existential subjective meaning and beauty of what we have, is that you can create that life and it is just as beautiful because it's important to you and it doesn't need to make sense to anybody else.
And I think actually in a funny way, knowing so much more about what other people are up to in the world, but also, sort of how vast the universe is and how tiny we are in it, in a way, I think it makes it easier to embrace that, because there's no possible way that you could be doing, it feels, people during the Renaissance could be sort of masters of all the knowledge, all the current day scientific knowledge of their time. And they could,
yes, they were. They knew everything. Yeah, that they could, because there was a limited amount of knowledge to know at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
At least knowledge of that kind, right?
Yes.
And it's just so painfully obvious that, we can't do that. And we also can't be everywhere at all times, like when I sit and scroll through my phone, I can be for a moment at, a party in Dubai, and then I can be like in Mexico on a beach, and then I can be somewhere else. And, I can't actually be in all of these places, and I can't do all of these things that I see even people I know doing.
Exactly.
And it's a bit freeing. It's fine for me to do, this thing, whatever this one thing is that I'm doing now.
I think that was a beautiful way to put it. Yeah. And the grandness of the scale, we're able to find, the life in the one piece of sand. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. Yeah. I want to hold space as we come to the end. If there's anything that you feel like you really wanted to use the platform to talk about or hit today, and that's okay if you don't have anything specifically. I also have a closing question, but I just like to leave a little bit of space in case anything was on your heart.
No, I appreciate that. I don't have anything specific. So let's hear the closing question.
Yes. My closing question is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Ooh. Just like anything. Related or not related? Oh.
Unrelated. I've had people say nipple hairs, men crying, you know. I've had the whole gamut, and I love to leave it just wide open.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. Take your time. I've got tea. I haven't even sipped yet. We're good.
There's like a galaxy of things that I wish people knew were normal. It can only be one thing though, right? It needs to be 8. That's part of the challenge.
Challenge me. Do what you want to do. If you've got multiple on your mind, we can talk about it. There's no rules. That's the anarchy of this, right? There's no rules.
That's true.
So you could just say, I don't want to answer it. And I'd be like, okay.
Yeah. No, okay. So I also wish that people, I want to normalize not just men crying, but like masculine people having emotions that are extremely complex and being hurt by things and feeling vulnerable about things. I also want to normalize toddlers nursing. Like a lot of people do that and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
As well as, family co-sleeping. I want to normalize.
Aww.
Like everyone tells you you're a terrible person who's going to kill your baby.
Really?
If you do that, yeah, because, increased risk of SIDS, they say, etc.
Sure.
Which actually is not the full story. That I want to normalize people sleeping on the floor, like mattress on the floor, no bed frame.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's actually great. Okay, first of all, if you have a thin mattress and a back that likes firmness, it's actually great for your back under those circumstances.
Interesting. Yeah.
Second, you have to use a lot more of your body getting up. So, if you're able to do this, if your body is a body that does that, it can actually be kind of nice for the joints to have them
get up. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to, what I wish people knew was normal, like actually taking, and this is the opposite of the thing I just said, which is very
love this.
Bodies, but people taking time off because they're sick and like not working. I want people to know that, for example, I take sick days when I'm, not even just like deadly sick, but like sick, and not feeling well. And then I don't check email and I don't feel any need to do any work. And I know that's a privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But for those who are in the position to do it, you should do it because we should normalize this for everybody.
Yeah. 100%.
So
you're telling me that you're worth more than your capitalistic production as a human?
Can you imagine?
I cannot.
Yeah. I am not just a means of production for somebody else. I'm a human being, and so are you.
Wow. Crazy. Especially in America, though. There's that meme where it was like, I think it was like a European goes out for vacation. They're like, yeah, I'm out for the summer. Like, email me in September. And then an American's like, yeah, I just had kidney surgery, but you can reach me at my cell phone. It's fine. And I was like,
God.
Yes.
It's so true.
American culture especially really pushes that. So I think that's a beautiful thing to normalize, that rest is needed and rest is deserved and rest is important, that you are much more than your means of production in this life.
Yes. But no, please see the nap ministry for further details.
I've never heard of that. What is that?
There's this person, I can't remember their actual name.
Yeah.
But they are like a rest activist, among other things. The nap ministry. They do other things too. But that is like the way that I became aware of them and one of the things that stuck.
Hell yeah, I'll check it out. It out. Well, yeah, I appreciate you coming on the podcast and just bouncing ideas off with a fellow philosopher. These are always fun conversations for me.
Thank you for having me. I also appreciate it.
Of course. If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're a part of the anarchist community, then follow us on Instagram or nominate a guest for the show by sending in a letter to modernanarchypodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.